I found out my uncle died on a Tuesday morning in March when a lawyer called to tell me I had inherited property in Pinewood Springs, Colorado. And my first thought was not grief but confusion, because I barely knew the man. My name is Scott Radford, and I am a 32-year-old accountant living in Denver with a mortgage, a decent car, and absolutely no expectation of ever inheriting anything from anyone. Uncle Gerald had been my father's older brother, the weird recluse who lived somewhere in the mountains and sent Christmas cards with $5 bills tucked inside until I turned 18. After that, nothing. My dad died when I was 25, and I assumed Gerald had just faded into complete obscurity, probably living off the grid somewhere, doing whatever hermits do. The lawyer, a man named Herbert Chen, explained over the phone that Gerald had owned a small piece of land, about 3 acres total, and that it was now mine. He made it sound simple, like inheriting a watch or a collection of old books. I told him I would drive up that weekend to check it out and sign whatever paperwork needed signing. The drive from Denver to Pinewood Springs took about 2 hours, winding through increasingly rural roads until I reached what looked like typical Colorado mountain territory. Pine trees, rocky outcroppings, and sprawling views that would have been breathtaking if I had not been so focused on finding the property. Herbert had given me an address, but GPS struggled once I got close. I ended up pulling into a gas station to ask for directions. The attendant, a kid who could not have been older than 19, looked at the address and nodded. "Oh yeah, that is the old access road. You go down Route 47, take a left at the fork, and you will see it. Leads right into Meadowbrook Estates." "Meadowbrook Estates?" I asked. "Yeah, the fancy subdivision. Houses start at like 700,000. Real nice place." I thanked him and followed his directions, finding the fork easily enough. The left turn took me onto a narrow paved road, maybe 20 feet wide, that cut through dense forest. It was well maintained, smooth asphalt with fresh yellow lines down the center. After about half a mile, the trees opened up, and I saw it. Meadowbrook Estates, a sprawling subdivision of maybe 60 or 70 large homes, each sitting on what looked like half-acre lots. The houses were McMansions, all vaguely similar in that modern craftsman style with stone facades and 3-car garages. I slowed down, confused. The road I was on appeared to be the only way in or out of the subdivision. There was no other entrance that I could see. I pulled over near the entrance sign, a fancy wooden structure with carved letters and landscape lighting, and checked the property documents Herbert had emailed me. According to the survey map, the road I had just driven on was the entirety of my inheritance. The 3 acres consisted of a 20-foot wide strip of land that ran for about half a mile, connecting Route 47 to the subdivision. It was not a plot where you could build a house. It was literally just the road. I sat there for a moment, trying to wrap my head around it. Why would Gerald own this? How did he even acquire it? And more importantly, why had nobody else ever purchased it or claimed it? I called Herbert. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, it is Scott. I am looking at the property now. This is just a road, the only road into a whole subdivision." "Yes, that is correct. But how does that work? Do not they have an easement or something?" There was a pause. "That is an interesting question. I reviewed the title history when preparing the estate documents, and I did not see any recorded easements. Your uncle purchased the land in 1987, long before the subdivision was developed. It appears the developers either assumed they had access or simply never filed the proper paperwork." I felt a strange flutter in my stomach, the kind you get when you realize you are holding a winning lottery ticket or standing at the edge of something significant. So you are saying this entire subdivision has been using my road without legal permission for how long? The subdivision was built in 2003, so approximately 23 years. And nobody ever noticed? It seems not. These things happen more often than you would think, especially in rural areas where property records are less meticulously maintained. Your uncle was not the type to make waves, from what I understand. He probably just let them use it without fuss. But now it is mine. Yes, Mr. Radford, now it is yours. I thanked Herbert and ended the call, staring at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates. A car exited as I sat there, a silver Lexus SUV driven by a woman in sunglasses who did not even glance my way. Another car followed, a Tesla. These were clearly wealthy people, living in their perfect little bubble, completely unaware that their only access road was privately owned by some random guy in Denver who had just inherited it from his hermit uncle. I am not a confrontational person by nature. My job involves spreadsheets and tax codes, not drama, but something about the situation struck me as absurd and, frankly, a little bit funny. I decided to drive through the subdivision just to get a sense of the place. The homes were immaculate. Every lawn perfectly manicured, every driveway pressure washed, every mailbox matching in that same craftsman style. It felt sterile, like a movie set. I noticed signs posted at various intervals. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, keep our community beautiful and slow down children at play, and no soliciting violators will be prosecuted. As I completed a loop through the main streets, I saw a woman standing in her driveway, arms crossed, watching me. She was maybe 50, with that particular haircut that every middle-aged suburban woman seems to get. Short, layered, blonde with highlights. She wore yoga pants and a fleece vest despite the mild weather. As I drove past, she pulled out her phone, clearly photographing my license plate. I waved. She did not wave back. By the time I returned to Denver that evening, I had received an email. The sender was listed as Meadowbrook Estates, HOA Patricia Whitmore, President. The email was curt. Dear Sir, you were observed driving through our private community today without authorization. Meadowbrook Estates is a gated community and unauthorized vehicles are not permitted. Please contact the HOA office immediately to explain your presence. Failure to respond will result in further action. Regards, Patricia Whitmore. I read it twice, my irritation building. Gated community. There was not even a gate, and further action. What were they going to do, send the HOA police? I typed a response. Dear Miss Whitmore, I was inspecting property that I own. As the owner of the access road your community uses, I have every right to drive on it. Perhaps we should discuss the fact that your HOA has been using my private road for over 2 decades without an easement or any legal agreement. I look forward to your response. Best, Scott Radford. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Her reply came within an hour. Mr. Radford, I do not know what you are talking about. The access road is community property, maintained and paid for by the HOA. If you believe otherwise, please provide documentation. Otherwise, I will consider your previous email harassment and report it to the authorities. I forwarded her the property survey, the deed, and the title report, all of which clearly showed that I owned the road. Then I went to bed, expecting that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I woke to 7 missed calls and a voicemail from Patricia Whitmore. Her tone had shifted from authoritative to shrill. Mr. Radford, I do not know what kind of scam you are trying to pull, but the HOA has consulted with our attorney, and he assures us that we have a prescriptive easement based on continuous use. You cannot just claim ownership of our road. I am demanding that you retract your previous statements immediately, or we will pursue legal action. Prescriptive easement. I had heard the term before but did not know the details. I spent my lunch break researching Colorado property law and discovered that a prescriptive easement could be established if someone used another person's land openly, continuously, and without permission for at least 18 years. The key word was without permission. If Gerald had given them permission, even implicitly, they could not claim a prescriptive easement. I called Herbert again. Did my uncle ever give the HOA permission to use the road? Any written agreement, verbal understanding, anything? Not that I am aware of. He never mentioned it to me, and there is nothing in his files. As far as I can tell, he just owned the land and ignored it. So they have been using it without permission. Technically, yes, but proving that in court might be complicated. They could argue that his silence implied permission. But he is dead now, and I did not give them permission. That is correct. You are under no obligation to continue any informal arrangement your uncle may have had. I thought about it for the rest of the day. I had no intention of cutting off access to the subdivision. That would be cruel and probably illegal at this point. But I also did not appreciate Patricia Whitmore's tone, her threats, or her assumption that she could bully me into backing down. I decided to make them sweat a little. That evening, I drafted a formal letter and had it notarized the next day. It stated that I, Scott Radford, was the legal owner of the access road to Meadowbrook Estates, that no easement had been filed or granted, and that continued use of the road would require a formal agreement, including compensation for past use and maintenance costs going forward. I sent copies to Patricia Whitmore, the HOA's registered agent, and the county clerk's office just to make it official. Then I waited. It took 3 days for the explosion to happen. Patricia called me at work, bypassing email entirely. My assistant transferred the call before I could stop her. Mr. Radford, this is Patricia Whitmore. What exactly do you think you are doing? Hello, Miss Whitmore. I am simply asserting my property rights. You are trying to extort this community. We have lived here for years, paid taxes, maintained that road with our own funds, and now you show up out of nowhere demanding money. This is outrageous. I am not demanding anything. I am simply pointing out that you have been using my property without a legal agreement. If you want to continue using it, we need to formalize the arrangement. We do not need your permission. Our lawyer says we have a prescriptive easement. Then I suggest your lawyer file the proper paperwork with the court and prove it. Until then, the road is mine. She sputtered for a moment, then hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. The HOA hired a law firm out of Colorado Springs, and I received a letter informing me that they were filing a lawsuit to establish a prescriptive easement. The letter was filled with legal jargon and thinly veiled threats, suggesting that I was acting in bad faith and that the court would rule against me. I hired my own attorney, a sharp woman named Monica Delgado who specialized in property disputes. She reviewed the case and gave me her assessment. They have a weak claim. Prescriptive easements require proof that the use was hostile, meaning without permission. If your uncle never objected, they will argue that his silence was permission. But you are not your uncle, and you have made your objection clear. The longer this drags out, the harder it will be for them to claim continuous hostile use. So what do? We file a countersuit for trespass and demand compensation. That will force them to the negotiating table. Monica was right. Within a month, the HOA's attorney reached out to discuss settlement. They proposed a formal easement in exchange for a one-time payment of $5,000. I laughed when Monica told me. $5,000. They have 70 houses in that subdivision, and each one is worth at least $700,000. They can do better. What are you thinking? I want $10,000 per household, paid into a trust. The interest from that trust will cover road maintenance in perpetuity. And I want a formal apology from Patricia Whitmore in writing for her harassment. Monica raised an eyebrow. That is $700,000. I know, and it is fair. They have been using my property for free for over 20 years. Consider it back rent. She grinned. I will make the offer. The HOA rejected it immediately, calling it unreasonable and insulting. They countered with $25,000. I countered back with $500,000. They refused. I refused. The lawsuit moved forward. During this time, I started visiting the property more often. I would park near the entrance to the subdivision and just sit there, drinking coffee, watching the residents come and go. It drove them crazy. Patricia Whitmore confronted me twice, once demanding I leave and once threatening to call the police. I told her both times that I was on my own property and had every right to be there. She did call the police the second time. The officer who showed up listened to both sides, checked my paperwork, and told Patricia there was nothing he could do. Madam, he owns the land. He is allowed to be here. But he is harassing us. He is sitting in his car. That is not harassment. I smiled and waved at Patricia as the officer left. She turned and stormed back to her house, her face red with fury. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Depositions, motions, discovery requests. The HOA's legal fees had to be piling up, and I knew from Monica that they were feeling the pressure. My costs were significant too, but I had structured my finances carefully, and I was willing to see it through. In October, 6 months after the whole thing started, Monica called with news. They want to settle. $50,000 formal easement, all legal fees paid by them. And the apology. They will include a statement acknowledging that you are the rightful owner and that they should have addressed this years ago. It was not the full amount I had asked for, but it was something. More importantly, it was a win. I had made my point. Counter with $75,000 and we have a deal. They accepted. The settlement was finalized in November. I received a check for $75,000. The HOA filed a formal easement granting them access in perpetuity. And Patricia Whitmore sent me a stiff, formal letter that technically qualified as an apology but read more like a hostage statement. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong again. In January, I received another email from Patricia. The subject line read, "Urgent road maintenance issue." The email explained that a section of the road had developed potholes due to winter weather and needed resurfacing. She estimated the cost at $15,000 and informed me that, as the property owner, I was responsible for the repairs. I read the email 3 times, my disbelief growing. They had just paid me $75,000 to settle the lawsuit, and now she wanted me to pay for road maintenance. I forwarded the email to Monica. Her response was succinct. Check the easement agreement. I pulled up the document and read through it carefully. The easement granted the HOA access to the road but did not specify who was responsible for maintenance. It was a glaring oversight, one that should have been addressed during the settlement negotiations. I called Monica. This is not in here. I know. Their attorney dropped the ball. Technically, as the landowner, you could argue that maintenance is your responsibility. But you could also argue that the easement holders, meaning the HOA, should maintain it since they are the primary users. What do you recommend? Tell them to fix it themselves. If they refuse, let them take you back to court. Given how much they just spent on the last lawsuit, I doubt they will want to. I sent a polite email to Patricia. explaining that the easement did not obligate me to maintain the road and suggesting that the HOA, as the primary beneficiary of the easement, should handle repairs. I offered to contribute a small amount as a gesture of goodwill, maybe $2,000, but made it clear I was not responsible for the full cost. Her response was immediate and vitriolic. "You are the most selfish, greedy person I have ever encountered. This community has done nothing but try to work with you, and you continue to exploit us at every turn. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." I did not respond. Instead, I waited. 2 weeks later, the potholes were fixed. I drove out to check, and the road looked brand new, freshly paved and striped. I never received another email from Patricia about it, but she was true to her word about making sure everyone knew who I was. In March, a local newspaper ran a story about the dispute, painting me as a greedy opportunist who had extorted a small community for tens of thousands of dollars. The article quoted Patricia extensively, along with several other residents who described me as a villain. My name and photo were included. The backlash was swift. I received angry emails, a few voicemails calling me a vulture, and even a handful of letters mailed to my apartment. One letter contained a check for 1 cent with a note that read, "Here is your blood money, you leech." I was frustrated but not surprised. The media loves a simple narrative, and I was an easy target. What the article failed to mention was that the HOA had been using my property illegally for decades, that Patricia had threatened and harassed me, or that I had offered to settle for a reasonable amount multiple times before the lawsuit escalated. Monica advised me to ignore it. It will blow over. People have short memories. She was right. By April, the story had faded and the angry emails stopped. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be given that I now owned a road I had no use for. In May, something strange happened. I received a call from a man named Richard Brennan, one of the residents of Meadowbrook Estates. He introduced himself politely and asked if we could meet for coffee. I was suspicious, but curious. We met at a cafe in Boulder, halfway between Denver and Pinewood Springs. Richard was in his early 60s, retired from some corporate job, and he had the calm, measured demeanor of someone who had spent decades navigating office politics. "I want to apologize," he said after we sat down. "Not on behalf of the HOA, because I do not speak for them, but personally. I think you were treated unfairly, and I think Patricia handled this whole situation terribly." I did not know what to say. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I have lived in Meadowbrook for 12 years, and I have watched Patricia drive away good people, start pointless feuds, and waste HOA funds on petty lawsuits. This thing with you was just the latest example. A lot of us are tired of it. So why are you telling me this?" "Because there is going to be an HOA election in June. A group of us are running on a platform of replacing the current board and bringing in new leadership. We think we can win, but it is going to be close. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the community supported what Patricia did." I appreciated the sentiment, but I was not sure what he expected from me. "I am glad to hear that. I hope you win. There is one more thing. If we do win, we would like to renegotiate the easement agreement. Not to reduce what we paid you, but to clarify the maintenance responsibilities and maybe establish a more collaborative relationship going forward. We want to make sure this does not happen again. I am open to that." We shook hands and he left. I sat there for a while, finishing my coffee and thinking about how strange the whole situation had become. A year ago, I had never heard of Meadowbrook Estates or Patricia Whitmore. Now I was somehow entangled in their community drama, a reluctant player in their HOA politics. The election happened in June, and Richard's group won by a narrow margin. Patricia was voted out as president, along with 2 other board members who had supported her. The new board reached out to me within a week, proposing a meeting to discuss the easement. We met at a conference room in the Pinewood Springs Library. The new board consisted of Richard, a woman named Laura Chen who worked in real estate, and a younger guy named David Torres, who was some kind of engineer. They were professional, respectful, and refreshingly reasonable. Laura presented a proposal. The HOA would take full responsibility for road maintenance, including regular resurfacing, snow removal, and repairs. In exchange, I would agree not to interfere with their use of the road and would grant them the right to make improvements as needed, subject to my approval. They also proposed establishing a reserve fund specifically for road maintenance, so there would never be a dispute about costs again. It was everything I had wanted from the beginning. I agreed on the spot, and we had the revised easement drafted and signed within a month. As I drove home that day, I felt a sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating, but it had also been oddly satisfying. I had stood up for myself, refused to be bullied, and ultimately forced a dysfunctional HOA to confront its own incompetence. But the story was not over yet. In August, I received a certified letter from the Colorado Attorney General's office. It was addressed to me but also copied to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The letter informed me that an investigation had been opened into the HOA's financial practices, specifically related to the lawsuit against me. I called the number listed on the letter and spoke to an investigator named Jennifer Kowalski. She explained that a whistleblower within the HOA, someone who had access to the financial records, had reported irregularities in how the legal fees were paid. We believe the former board, specifically Patricia Whitmore, may have misused HOA funds to pursue the lawsuit against you. There is evidence suggesting that she approved payments without proper authorization from the membership and may have inflated the amounts to cover personal expenses. I was stunned. How much are we talking about? We are still investigating, but preliminary estimates suggest at least $40,000 in unauthorized expenditures. What happens now? We continue the investigation. If we find evidence of criminal activity, we will refer the case to the district attorney for prosecution. I wanted to give you a heads up because you may be called as a witness. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. Patricia had not just been incompetent or vindictive. She had potentially committed fraud. Over the next few months, the investigation unfolded. It turned out that Patricia had billed the HOA for legal fees that were significantly higher than what the attorney had actually charged, pocketing the difference. She had also used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including a vacation to Arizona and a new laptop, by disguising them as community expenditures. The total amount of misappropriated funds was estimated at $63,000. In October, Patricia Whitmore was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. The news made the local papers again, but this time the narrative was different. I was no longer the villain. I was the person who had inadvertently exposed a corrupt HOA president. The case went to trial in January. I was called to testify about the lawsuit and the settlement. I described Patricia's threats, her aggressive tactics, and the pressure she had put on the HOA to pursue a losing case. The prosecution used my testimony to establish a pattern of reckless decision-making and financial mismanagement. Patricia's defense argued that she had acted in what she believed was the best interest of the community, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus additional fines. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Barbara Holt, made it clear in her sentencing remarks that she had no tolerance for people who abused positions of trust. Miss Whitmore, you were entrusted with the financial well-being of your community, and you betrayed that trust for personal gain. Your actions not only harmed the homeowners of Meadowbrook Estates, but also undermined the integrity of homeowner associations everywhere. I hope this sentence serves as a deterrent to others who might be tempted to engage in similar conduct. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. Patricia did not look at me, but I saw her shoulders slump as the judge spoke. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and maybe a little bit of pity. She had brought this on herself, but it was still hard to watch someone's life unravel so completely. After the trial, Richard Brennan invited me to a community meeting at Meadowbrook Estates. It was the first time I had been back since the lawsuit settled. The new board wanted to formally thank me and present a plaque recognizing my role in exposing the fraud. I almost declined, but Monica convinced me to go. You deserve the recognition, and it will be good for the community to see that you are not the villain Patricia made you out to be. The meeting was held in the Subdivision's clubhouse, a nice building with a big open room and a small kitchen. About 40 residents showed up, which I was told was a good turnout. Richard gave a speech thanking me for my patience and for standing up to Patricia's bullying. Laura presented the plaque, which read, "To Scott Radford, in recognition of his integrity and perseverance. Thank you for helping us build a better community." It was cheesy, but I appreciated the gesture. A few residents came up to me afterward to shake my hand and apologize for the way I had been treated. One woman, an elderly lady named Margaret, told me she had always thought Patricia was a nasty piece of work and was glad she was finally gone. As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed in the 2 years since I inherited the road. I had gone from a quiet accountant with no connection to Pinewood Springs to the reluctant hero of a suburban HOA drama. It was absurd, surreal, and completely unplanned. But I had also learned something important. Standing up for yourself, even when it is uncomfortable or costly, matters. Bullies like Patricia Whitmore rely on people backing down, on the assumption that it is easier to give in than to fight. I had refused to give in, and in doing so, I had not only protected my own rights, but also helped uncover corruption that had harmed an entire community. The road itself, the 3 acres of asphalt that had started all of this, remained mine. The easement was in place, the maintenance was handled, and I collected a modest annual fee from the HOA for the privilege of using it. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to cover my legal fees and then some. I still drive out to Pinewood Springs occasionally, just to check on things. The road is always in good condition, the subdivision is thriving, and the new HOA board has turned out to be competent and reasonable. Patricia Whitmore is in prison, serving her sentence, and as far as I know, nobody from Meadowbrook Estates has visited her. Life has a funny way of working out. I inherited a road I never wanted, fought a battle I never expected, and ended up making a difference I never imagined. And all because my hermit uncle bought a piece of land in 1987 and never told anyone what he planned to do with it. Sometimes I wonder what Gerald would have thought about all of this. Would he have been proud, amused, horrified? I will never know. But I like to think he would have appreciated the irony of it all. A quiet piece of land, ignored for decades, becoming the center of a legal and criminal storm. As for me, I am back to my normal life. spreadsheets, tax codes, and the occasional weekend drive to the mountains. But I keep the plaque from Meadowbrook Estates on my desk at work, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected inheritances are the ones that change your life in ways you never could have predicted. And if I ever get another call from a lawyer telling me I have inherited property, I will know to ask a lot more questions before signing anything. Because you never know when a simple piece of land might turn into the adventure of a lifetime, complete with corrupt HOA presidents, legal battles, and a courtroom drama that would make a great movie someday. The best part, though, is knowing that I did the right thing. I could have backed down, could have accepted Patricia's bullying, could have let the HOA continue using my property without compensation or recognition. But I did not. I fought for what was mine, exposed corruption in the process, and helped a community rid itself of a toxic leader. That is worth more than any settlement check or plaque on my desk. It is the knowledge that when it mattered, when I was pushed and threatened and vilified in the press, I stood my ground and won. Not because I was smarter or richer or more powerful, but because I was right. And in the end, being right is enough. The months following the trial were quiet. I settled into a routine, visiting the property every few weeks just to make sure everything was in order. The HOA kept up their end of the agreement, maintaining the road impeccably and sending me quarterly reports on the reserve fund they had established. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous 2 years. In April, I got an unexpected call from a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Goldstein. She had read about the case in the Colorado Springs Gazette and wanted to interview me for a project she was producing about HOA abuses across America. "Your story is exactly the kind of thing we are looking for," she said during our first phone call. "An individual standing up to an overreaching HOA and exposing corruption. It is a David and Goliath story, and people need to hear it." I was hesitant at first. The media attention from the trial had died down, and I was not eager to reopen that chapter of my life. But Sarah was persistent and persuasive. She explained that the documentary would focus on the broader issues of HOA governance, accountability, and the lack of oversight that allows people like Patricia Whitmore to abuse their power. "You are not the focus," she assured me. "You are one of several stories we are telling. But your case is particularly compelling because it resulted in criminal charges. That almost never happens." I agreed to participate, and we filmed the interview in May at my apartment in Denver. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about how the situation had unfolded, how I had felt during the various confrontations with Patricia, and what I had learned from the experience. She also interviewed Monica, Richard Brennan, and several other Meadowbrook residents who were willing to speak on camera. The documentary premiered at a film festival in Boulder in September and was later picked up by a streaming service. I watched it with a mix of pride and embarrassment, seeing myself on screen talking about spreadsheets and property law. But the overall message was powerful, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. People reached out to me from all over the country, sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for shining a light on the issue. One email in particular stood out. It was from a man in Florida named Thomas Pratt, who explained that he had been fighting his own HOA for years over a similar access road dispute. He had seen the documentary and wanted advice on how to proceed. I spent an hour on the phone with Thomas, walking him through the steps I had taken, the mistakes I had made, and the strategies that had worked. He was grateful and promised to keep me updated on his case. Over the following months, I heard from several other people in similar situations, and I found myself becoming an accidental advocate for property rights and HOA reform. It was not something I had planned or even wanted, but it felt meaningful. These were ordinary people like me, who had been bullied or taken advantage of by their HOAs and did not know where to turn. If my experience could help them, then all the stress and legal fees had been worth it. In December, I received a letter from the new Meadowbrook HOA board inviting me to their annual holiday party. It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. I drove up to Pinewood Springs on a cold Saturday evening and was greeted warmly by Richard, Laura, and David. The clubhouse was decorated with lights and garland, and about 50 residents were there, drinking wine and eating appetizers. Several people recognized me and came over to say hello. Margaret, the elderly woman who had called Patricia a nasty piece of work, gave me a hug and told me I was always welcome in the community. A younger couple, newly moved in, thanked me for helping clean up the HOA before they bought their house. It was surreal, standing in the clubhouse of a subdivision I had never intended to be part of, surrounded by people who had once viewed me as an enemy but now saw me as something else. A friend, maybe, or at least an ally. As the evening wound down, Richard pulled me aside. "I know this whole thing started as a fight, but I want you to know that you have made a real difference here. This community is better because of what you did. We are more transparent, more accountable, and more aware of our responsibilities. So thank you." I shook his hand, feeling a lump in my throat. I am just glad it worked out, me too. Driving home that night, I reflected on how much my life had changed. 2.5 years ago, I had been a solitary accountant with no ties to Pinewood Springs or Meadowbrook Estates. Now I was part of their story, woven into the fabric of their community in a way I never could have anticipated. The road, that narrow strip of asphalt that had caused so much trouble, was no longer just a piece of property. It was a symbol of something larger, the importance of standing up for yourself, the danger of unchecked authority, and the possibility of redemption and change. I still own the road. The easement ensures that the HOA can use it, but the land itself remains mine. I have no plans to sell it or develop it. It is my connection to a place and a story that will always be part of who I am, and if I am being honest, I am proud of that. Proud of the fight I fought, proud of the corruption I helped expose, and proud of the relationships I built along the way. It was not easy, and there were times I wanted to give up, but I did not. I saw it through to the end, and the end turned out to be better than I ever could have hoped. So here I am, Scott Radford, accountant, property owner, and accidental advocate for HOA reform. My life is not glamorous or exciting, but it is mine, and it is meaningful. And that is more than enough. As winter settled over Colorado, I found myself thinking about Uncle Gerald more often. I had barely known him, but his decision to buy that strip of land in 1987 had set all of this in motion. What had he been thinking? Had he known the subdivision would be built? Had he anticipated the conflict? Or had he simply seen an opportunity and taken it, leaving the consequences to sort themselves out decades later? I would never know the answers, but I like to imagine that somewhere, in whatever comes after, Gerald was watching and laughing. He had given me more than just a piece of property. He had given me a challenge, a purpose, and a story that would stay with me for the rest of my life. And for that, I would always be grateful. The years that followed were quieter. The road remained well-maintained, the HOA stayed functional and transparent, and Patricia Whitmore served her sentence without incident. I heard through Richard that she was released early for good behavior and moved out of state, presumably to start over somewhere far from Pinewood Springs. I occasionally thought about reaching out to her, maybe to ask why she had acted the way she did, but I never followed through. Some questions are better left unanswered. Instead, I focused on my own life. I got a promotion at work, started dating someone I met through a friend, and even bought a small cabin near Estes Park where I could escape on weekends. The cabin was not far from Pinewood Springs, and I would sometimes drive past Meadowbrook Estates on my way, glancing at the road that had changed everything. It always looked the same, smooth, clean, and unremarkable, just a road like thousands of others. But to me, it would always be more than that. It was proof that ordinary people can make a difference, that standing up to bullies matters, and that sometimes the most unexpected inheritances are the ones that teach you the most about yourself. So that is my story. The story of how I inherited an access road, fought an HOA, exposed a corrupt president, and became part of a community I never asked to join. It was messy, complicated, and at times infuriating, but it was also one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And if I had to do it all over again, I would not change a thing.